it's like to sort of bring it back in a sense to the core of the show and this idea of, it's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek here, like Sweet Home, right? What I think is interesting, and perhaps the reason to even talk about labor practices, idea of time, is the fact that the different objects that inhabit our house actually have these very different narratives, right? So the way that we've compartmentalized them in our society, we do have, very specific market for, amazingly built tables, right? And there are whole galleries that cater to that. We do have markets that are, supermarkets, things for industrial production objects, and then we have a whole separate other world that lives with fine arts objects. But we have, it's not where all of these easily compartmentalizable tasks and objects break down is in our own space, right? It's like we can have all these narratives dictated to us, but the way that we're going to internalize them is very messy, very exciting, Again, more of an observation than a direct question. But
so that was when you mentioned the Richard Long piece that was like about the mantle. Is that the
yeah. So one of the things that was talking to Nathan about earlier is a piece in an acquaintance's house, Richard Long piece, which is really kind of meant to evoke specific walks that Long was doing a couple of decades ago in the countryside. But the formal quality of that piece, it's really beautiful. It's got kind of like these circular objects arranged in another circle, like really lended itself very nice to like decorative uses, right? So it hangs above this person's fireplace, frames it really nicely, and is framed by it very nicely.
Yeah, I've come to that encounter myself with like trying to decorate my house. Like I have something that is like I bought at a coffee shop right next to something that might have a lot more significance to me. And they can like exist simultaneously in this kind of collage that I assemble for my space.
This way, Louise Lawler's work is really interesting because she documents these moments, some of them quite humorous.
And like Pinterest is an interesting thing because it is kind of like, it's like you sort of having this domestic space like online. It's like all your interests or all of your values are kind of represented in this like continuum. And you constantly are editing. It's just like that. You kind of pull things out and put stuff up and that sort of thing.
And that has, oh no, go ahead. I was just going to say that's related to this urge for collecting, which I think this whole show has been, putting the house on display is a very Victorian concept, and that idea of even having, these mushrooms displayed with a quilt that isn't used as a quilt, it's a decorative object, and having the bookcase not even just showing books. There's the more these ceramic pieces, and so I guess I kind of had a question. I wanted to go back talking about the intention of not only the mushrooms but upstairs as well with the weeds, and I think people were coming in as you were kind of talking about that, and maybe I missed it. If you could just revisit, and that kind of goes back to where we began this conversation about time and labor. But I was just interested to hear more about your intention with those with your pieces, I
Um,
guess.
Sure. So the objects of collection are sort of these cast-offs. They're things that I would normally collect. So upstairs there's weeds that are taken from a nearby overpass that are suspended by tobacco sticks and the rafters of the upstairs architecture, similar to the way that you would hang tobacco in a tobacco barn. And so this is kind of a play on, the utility of tobacco production, the, money economy of tobacco production, and sort of opening for, like, an economy of weeds, sort of, how do we use the things that are already around us, the things that we don't seek after as these products of labor, but like the things that are already there, and how do we make use of those things in daily life, and to create a kind of thrift that sort of releases the pressures of so much production in a limited time. So with these, it's like there's multiple time systems at work with the mushroom. There's the time of collecting them. There's the time of the drying out. There's the time of like when they appear in the forest. So the impulse to collect here is one of like collecting things that are the leftovers or the wastes as a way of getting at like another kind of utility.
So in this case, does it become kind of like a visual utility in a sense?
No. I mean, there's a visual element, and sure, I'm interested in how the work functions visually, but I'm also interested in it as a kind of conceptual play on labor. Like, what does it mean to go out and do something with an idea of what will be benefited from at the end of it, and sort of remaining open in that process to what can happen that's unexpected, and make use of those unexpected things.
So are those mushrooms edible?
Some are, some aren't.
So you'd have to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you better know.
So, wanted to kind of bring this back to maybe kind of a regional question, right? Because both of you guys are, young artists working in Kentucky. It's like there's certain pressures to working in this region. Some of them being internal, meaning that there is an expectation of craft with the capital C, without quotation marks, and sort of authenticity. There is also external kind of view of the region as a repository of these very, we'll talk about it in terms of time, but perhaps, again, authentic, without quotation marks, authentic experiences that are perhaps indicative of like a bygone era, right? I mean, like we do produce coal, which happens to be, as we've had these conversations before, coal being a very like 19th century way of powering your home, non-sustainable in the past, rather than, it's like something like really current, really like exciting, like wind or, or solar power, right? So I'm giving a little bit of maybe too much of a context here, but what are some of your ideas and some of the ways that you deal with both internal dialogue within this region and external, perhaps ways that people cast, cast their understanding of what it means to be from non-metropolitan, perhaps rural America?
I mean, that was a lot, but
Yes.
if I were to interpret it myself, I enjoy showing my work, especially my full pieces, regionally, because the understanding of the pieces is much more rich, and the feedback that I get from the viewer is much more engaged, and they're more interested, because many people who live in Kentucky have an association with the history of quilt making. They have a family relation. They have a memory of, I don't know, nostalgia or whatever, of that piece. And I get much more of a reaction. Like I've made an old grandma cry before I had a piece where I cut holes in like 9 quilts, and she literally walked into the gallery and started crying because of the fact that I had ruined, like, decimated these quilts. And I don't think I would ever get that type of reaction with that same piece in other states or other regions. Maybe it is a matter of rural versus city, I don't know. But I enjoy that idea of showing it where the quilts are collected from. That they're collected from here. Therefore, I want to kind of reflect that in the work. Does that make sense?
I want to address the first part of your question about coal and this idea of coal being a 19th century resource. And I think it goes back to what my response to nostalgia earlier. This essentialism of a time period that like we're in this moment, which is presumably defined by a dematerialized kind of cognitive experience that has very little contact with physical reality. And what's contained in that is obviously we burn as much coal as we ever have, if not more. And not only that, the resources that are used to create these technologies that give us this experience are relying on rare earth minerals that are mined in regions that are outside of our view. And so there's a very hard physical reality that's being concealed within this idea of hyper-reality. So I think being from Kentucky gives one a perspective to witness that kind of physical aftermath of the technological moment, and in a way to expose this kind of denial of coevalness, denial of contemporaneity between to be from Kentucky is to be in the past, and this a colonialist narrative, like that people who are outside of the centers of development belong to other time periods. And I think that's something that's it's an exploitive myth, or it's used to exploit the resources of people from those regions.
But how does this enter into your production? And does it?
I sort of throw off. I use it as an opportunity to throw off this idea that I have to be of the time, that I have to be, contemporary, or that my work has to appeal to a contemporary aesthetic. And that's not to say that I want to look like I'm from another time period, but it's like I don't give much credence to what the moment is supposed to be defined by.
That's often a criticism of my work, is that it doesn't look like contemporary work. It's more craft-based. I don't want to get into art versus craft, but it's much. I often don't really fit in that more conceptual contemporary setting. In a lot of cases, I'm told that, at least, which I always think is kind of interesting.
What do you mean by conceptual?
Well, like this type of space versus if I were to show more like a traditional fiber show or traditional
A space where you have to explain.
where you would have this type of conversation.
Something.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's also again not to repeat that word narrative a gajillion different times, but we do construct these spaces with preconceived notions, right? So we have a contemporary craft world which has its own set of galleries, it has its own set of shows, and its own types of valuation that's very much attached to it, right? So it's there isn't a valuation of did you use the right kind of stitch with the right type of, in the right type of setting, and I don't know how far it goes into what type of fabrics and whatever, but a lot of people in the, again, quote unquote, contemporary art world, because arguably it's art world, but they are completely blind to that, right? Certain technical requirements that you need to have in the what you call it in the craft world, just like,
It's arbitrary, yeah.
yeah.
But it could be included, it just needs to be expressed in the work, or it has to be part of your statement or your intention.
Actually, it's kind of impossible to work out of your own time, period. In retrospect, everything looks like it was part of the time that it was made. It just does. That's why we have art history and we can identify all those things. That's not why we have it, but everything has it's contextual in that way, and sometimes it's just not revealed until later.
I don't really look at it, I don't think art history exists. I think there's just quantum, like, leaps throughout history. I think that people, like, in different time periods that were doing something apart from their time, or apart from what was being done, because they didn't really hold to the traditions of the stitches have to be this way or whatever. Maybe that.
Well, you know, it's like there, it just, you know, the way I was describing is different types of worlds with different types of valuation criteria. You know, because like simultaneously we have, you know, your international contemporary art world, which is defined by, like, you know, 5 cities and 500 people in those cities, you know, and has very specific gallery structure that is attached to it, right? And then at the same time, like if you look at academia, there's every single media specialization has its own set of valuation criteria. So like, you know, you have for ceramics, you have NCICA, for photo, you have SPE, for new media, you have various other shows, and those don't necessarily interface with the 500 people and, you know, all of the contemporary art world. And then on top of that, you have sort of almost like, you know, another set of valuation criteria for artist-run spaces, which often cannot afford the fees to get all the art stars that, you know, the first set of spaces that I was talking about has. So it's like in each one of these spaces we have different valuation criteria. You know, and that's in some ways one of the issues that we're kind of dealing with, right? Because we kind of have to have some commonality in language, but it's very hard to even figure out what's taken for granted in each one of these settings. Because people don't jump the settings. Like, for example, Colleen's work in a craft show is a little bit of an anomaly, right? And in a contemporary art show, it might be like, I think she's dealing with this craft community moment, but most of us don't necessarily have the background to dig into the communal nature or the historical, what you call the historical background of that communal nature. So, yeah. I don't know. Are there any other questions from the audience? Because I've talked long enough. Do you guys want to ask me any questions?
I don't know, I was ready for that.
Hey, I'm just throwing that out as an option.
Are we gonna eat soon?
We can, for sure. And then at this point, you re-emphasize the fact that this show is up and running until October 26th. On October 26th, we're going to have an estate sale, i.e. everything, almost everything around you is going to be up for sale. And at that point, we're really going to sort of see how much we value things that A, are industrially produced couches, B, are very much beautifully handcrafted tables, right, and benches, and bookshelves, and
Track locks.
pardon me? That one you'll have to speak to the to the gallery people about. But last but definitely not least are objects that are within fine arts kind of proper.